So we should be recording now. So Alicia, if you'd like to introduce yourself and start your presentation, that'd be great.
Sure, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Alicia Herman. I am a school improvement specialist in special education for the Montana OPI. And one of my areas of interest has been choice exceptionality. So that is why I would like to present a little bit about this today. Before we get started, I just want to make sure everyone knows that I am perfectly fine with you interrupting me at any point. If you have any questions, comments, or something comes up, please feel free to stop me. You do not have to wait until the end. I like to address things as they come up, so feel free. And I'll go ahead and start. There we go. The objectives today is just to define and provide characteristics of choice exceptional learners to increase awareness of this population and explain why they're at risk and increase awareness of the importance and complexity in identifying these learners, and to provide some professional development regarding appropriate strengths-based support for choice exceptional learners, and to just help connect a community of educators and professionals knowledgeable in choice exceptionality throughout the state. I threw in a quick comment just because I find them amusing, and that one is pretty typical of a 2E student, and sometimes what they're doing confuses adults, but most of the time they know what's going on. So who are choice exceptional learners?
Alicia, before we get started, just let me know when you want to do your questions as well.
Oh, okay. It's a survey, and if we want to just put them, can we just put it in the chat, Anne, and maybe people can do it at the end? Would that be, or what is the best way for you?
Yeah, I will put the rating ones in the chat real quick, and then we'll figure out the other ones.
Sounds good. Hey, so who are choice exceptional learners? When you have a child with high intelligence, which traditionally is called gifted, and that child also meets criteria as a child with a disability, such as a student with trouble focusing, planning, or organizing, as we see with ADHD, or trouble making social connections or regulating emotions, which is typical in students on the autism spectrum, we call these students choice exceptional, or 2E. One exception to the norm is their very high intellect. The other exception to the norm is their area of challenge. So we see there those two areas of exceptionality coming in, which is why we call them 2E learners. And it's very important for teachers and parents to recognize exceptional students, choice exceptional students early on, and apply appropriate intervention, because they're at very high risk for underachievement in school, which often results in lifelong feelings of failure. But determining who's choice exceptional and providing them with a proper education can be a major challenge for educators. The prevalence of choice exceptional learners in schools is very difficult to put an exact number on, because there are likely many students who are unidentified. Choice exceptionality usually doesn't present itself until the student is in school. Sometimes it's late elementary, even into middle and high school. And when the social complexities and the educational expectations for the student,
Alicia, we're having trouble hearing you. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can hear Alicia okay? Okay. Yeah, something's going on with the audio. I'm going to keep doing the poll questions.
Now
I think it might be the internet
It'll-
connection. She's super frozen.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna try
I'm
stopping
sorry.
the video. Does it work better now? Any better now?
Not really.
Keep talking. Let's see.
I'm just trying. I'm getting the internet connection is
There you-
unstable, which is pretty unusual. But can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's better.
Maybe if
Yep,
I-
that's better.
I'm gonna keep my video off then and see if that works better.
Okay.
Hey, thank you, Anne, for letting me know also. So it's difficult to determine the number of students who are twice exceptional because the presentation can be so varied. But the National Association of Gifted Children used the following data to make an estimate. And this data is from 2021. And about 15% of public school population is identified as having a disability, and 6% of the school population is identified as gifted, which amounts to about 0.5% of public school population, which is currently identified as twice exceptional. So why identify and support these students? Without proper identification and support, twice exceptional learners are at a high risk for challenges that extend far beyond the classroom. Their gifts often mask their learning disabilities, which can result in non-diagnosis. And these students are at very high risk for underachievement. They often appear unmotivated or lazy, and their giftedness gets masked by the learning challenges, which leads to feelings of frustration and potentially much lower grades than their peers. Twice exceptional students are often deeply misunderstood, and adults who are not familiar with the differences often make damaging remarks based on assumptions. TUI students often receive lower grades than peers despite their efforts and are expected to have the skills needed for complex tasks or assignments. For example, a student who has demonstrated their knowledge of science and has been able to complete experiments in the class very successfully, but then when they're asked to organize their data into a visual to present to the class, maybe in a science fair, their presentation is disorganized. Maybe it has handwritten numbers and results, but there's no flow or organization. And there's no logical sequence to the information that they're presenting. So seeing that big disconnect there would be a very big red flag that there might be something going on. These students are often seen as argumentative when their intentions are to have in-depth discussions or gain deeper knowledge, or they're viewed as very annoying because they're constantly asking questions and want to learn more. They're told they're lazy or not working to their potential, or that they're too smart to struggle with things like turning in their homework or remembering to bring materials to class. They're also expected to understand social nuances or infer information that hasn't been explicitly taught to them. One example of this, my son, who is now 13, he is twice exceptional. And just a few months ago, I was asking him to please take his pillowcase and go and put it on his pillow. So he took the pillowcase and he folded it very nicely and put it on top of his pillow on his bed. So then when I went in, I thought he was being smart alecky or just not doing what I asked because he did not put the pillow in the pillowcase. So that was just one example that always pops to my head on how I never taught him what I needed him to do. And I wasn't very explicit about the directions. So he thought he was doing what I had asked him. Another.
Alicia, I'm sorry to interrupt. So are you still doing your slideshow?
Yes. Is it not showing up?
Well, we're still on slide 5. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know, I did put question 4 in the chat, and there are some lots of unknown as some answers, and so you might want to address those questions in the chat?
Yep. Let me see. Okay. So there's a lot of you do not know if you're okay. I will come back to those. 111. Okay, thank you, Anne. So another risk with choice exceptional learners is misdiagnosis. And this often occurs because of their asynchronous development, or they're identified as having a learning disability or a behavioral problem, but their giftedness is overlooked, which makes it very difficult for them to get the support that they need. Misdiagnosis can really be damaging to the students who are already at risk for mental illness. And this mixed diagnosis may make them feel bad about themselves, and they begin to internalize shame, and they don't really acknowledge their strengths. So that then affects their self-esteem, and their continuous struggle in certain areas, despite knowing that they're intelligent, damages their confidence and leads them to feel very misunderstood and confused and feel like they're not meeting any expectations of others. They often struggle to connect with peers. They often feel out of place and not accepted and gifted or in special education classrooms. And this can lead to loneliness and withdrawal. They're also at high risk for emotional and behavioral problems, as the learning challenges leads to feelings of frustration and anxiety. And this often manifests as behavioral issues in the classroom. They begin to resent school and learning, and this typically starts to occur in middle school. And because of this misidentification, after study, they can strive.
Alicia, you're breaking up again.
Still can't hear it. Nope, can't hear it yet.
We're not hearing you. It's just a bunch of jumble.
How about, let me come back on. I'll go to the next slide.
I wonder if you want to
Now?
call in. Would it be possible for you to call in for your audio?
Absolutely. Yes.
I put the number in chat.
Thank you.
Sorry, everybody. This happens once in a while. Well, while we're waiting for Alicia to call in, let's go back to question number 1 on a scale of 0 to 5. How would you rate your knowledge of twice exceptional characteristics? So we got a 1, a 4, and a 5. So does anybody want to make any comments?
Anne, can you guys hear me now?
Oh, so much better. Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, great. I'll let you go on.
Okay. I'm hearing myself there. Is that better now?
Yes, the
Okay.
echo, we had an echo, but now the echo is gone. So that's perfect.
Yes.
All right. I apologize about this. Of course, it's the one time when I'm presenting that my internet seems to be bouncing around after being fine all day. But let's continue on. I will go to the next slide here. So one of the challenges of identifying 2E learners is the myths surrounding 2E learners. And the first one is that being gifted makes up for having a learning difference. And this is just not true. Thinking about it like a student who maybe is blind, so they have a disability, but they are also gifted. If we give them the materials in a way that works for them with those accommodations and modifications, then they are able to excel and reach their potential. So there's no canceling each other out here. Each area of exceptionality is quite separate and needs to be addressed individually, but occurring at the same time. The second myth is that students can't be gifted and lack basic skills, so they're just not trying hard enough. And when students are doing mostly well, the school is often hesitant to evaluate them for special education services. And it's important to remember that academics are not the only thing to consider. There are other challenges that can point to learning and thinking differences, including having trouble making friends or managing their emotions. So a student, and we will come back to this later, but they do not need to be behind grade level in order to qualify for special education services. Myth 3 is that 2E students are not eligible for IEPs or 504 plans. And this is untrue because the Department of Education has made it very clear that 2E students and behavioral supports are covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and schools must evaluate a child if any disability is suspected. And students who are found eligible should have an IEP or a 504 plan. Myth 4. There we go. Giftedness and challenges can't be addressed at the same time, and they need to be addressed at the same time. So they need to have support that is allowing them to, the enrichment that they might need, as well as those areas of deficiency. And myth 5 is addressing weaknesses should be the top priority when helping 2E students. And the opposite is actually true. We really need to focus on what the student does well and their strengths and build on that before we start bringing them up in the areas where they're deficient. And the 6th myth is that 2E students need accommodations, so they cannot be in AP classes. And this is also not true. A student can be in any kind of advanced placement classes or enrichment and still have the accommodations that they would use in any other classroom. And myth 7, 2E students should be more mature than other kids their age. And this goes along with that asynchronous development. So oftentimes we see that they're very far ahead intellectually, but they're lagging in social and emotional skills. And this gap causes a lot of anxiety and makes it very difficult for them to connect with other kids their age. Here are some of the characteristics of twice exceptional students. And typical 2E students often have sensory sensitivity, that asynchronous development, and perfectionism. Many 2E kids hate labels in their clothes and seams in their socks. They're very sensitive to loud noises, or they might have a particular sensitivity to smells, tastes, and textures of food. They're often natural leaders, and they demonstrate that streetwise behavior, or the disability may interfere with the student's ability to engage those leadership skills that might come naturally to them. They're often perfectionists and they struggle with anxiety, and they place unrealistic expectations on themselves and are hesitant to try something new because of a fear of failure. They're often perceived as loners because they do not fit the typical model of either gifted or learning disabled. They often have trouble being accepted by peers and struggle with poor social skills. We see the focused interests that you might see with a student who is also on the autism spectrum disorder. This might alienate them, as oftentimes their interests are not related to school subjects. And then the really big one is this asynchronous development, and that is what you will be looking for when you suspect twice exceptionality. Someone who's very bright with varied interests and advanced vocabulary when you're talking with them, but then they are unable to organize those ideas and thoughts on paper. Their grades will alternate very high and very low, sometimes within the same subject area. And they may be mature in some areas and very immature in others. Oftentimes we'll see these students who use anger, crying, withdrawal to express their feelings and have trouble dealing with conflict. They might complete all of their assignments, but then they get lost before they can even turn them in. And parents and teachers often see this as not trying. When they are working very hard, they just really struggle with those executive functioning skills. And one of the most common characteristics is low self-esteem. They frequently disguise low self-esteem through the use of anger, withdrawal, disruptive behaviors, or self-criticism. They might be clowning around in class, or they might just deny that they have any concerns at school. Okay. And there is a comprehensive list of 2E characteristics on the OPI website for gifted and talented. And I put that link in here, and I will also throw it in the chat before we finish up today. So I'll come back to that. Okay, and this one is a video, and it's about Riley. I'm wondering how this is going to work with calling in. I'm hoping it will still work. And Riley is not working.
We're still seeing slide 7.
Oh, it hasn't moved to 8?
Oh, there now. Okay.
And now I went too far. Oops. Hold on, Anne, I'm trying to get it to go backwards. I'm going to pull this up in another screen, I think. That will be easiest. Give me just a moment here. I want to switch screens for just a second. Thank you for your patience with me. And Anne, can you share it again? The screen share, so I can have it go to the other screen I have up.
You should be able to.
There we go. Okay. Can you hear that?
No. Maybe put your phone next to the speaker. Nope, that didn't work. Do we have any IT people who could give her offer suggestion?
I'm not, that is not working. I'm so sorry. Okay, well, technology is not my friend today. Let me stop share.
Unfortunately, on my slideshow, I can't get the video to play. I don't have a link.
Okay, well, I guess we will move on from the video. It talks about Riley, who's a student who struggles significantly in reading, and his math skills, where he was exceptional in math, were not noticed until he was much older. And a teacher noticed his aptitude in math, and once they were able to provide his accommodations, then he was able to really excel and move forward quickly in math. So it's a really great video. I will get it out to everyone at the end of this presentation. So some of the challenges of identifying students who are twice exceptional is that giftedness masks that disability. Twice exceptionality can be difficult to understand and identify because most twice exceptional students will use their strengths to compensate for what they cannot do. And their abilities and disabilities mask each other, which can result in underachievement. They're often seen as underachievers, lazy, poor motivation, or low self-concept, but they maintain grade level expectations until the difficulty level of the curriculum increases to the point that they can no longer maintain that masking. Number 2 is when the disability masks the giftedness. So here we have those students that they have great reasoning skills, but their disability depresses their intellectual performance, so they're not recognized for their high intelligence and their high potentiality. Next, is my screen moving, Anne?
We have you on slide 10.
Okay. Next, we have the average achievement student. So this is the student where everything about them presents as just average. They're at grade levels, so they're assumed to have average ability. But again, as the curriculum becomes more challenging, they start to fall behind. And they're viewed as performing within expectations of the school, so they're never referred for special education. Next, we have the signs of giftedness and signs of learning disabilities. And I just like this visual here so you can see them side by side, because you will be getting some of the characteristics of both. And if neither one is identified, then they're not receiving the appropriate support. And without the targeted interventions to address their specific challenges, they might struggle to reach their full potential and appear average academically. Classrooms often focus on meeting grade level expectations, and this leaves the advanced needs of gifted students unmet and does not provide enough targeted support for their learning disabilities. Next, we have strengths and challenges. And one of the big red flags is to really look for that asynchronous development. So when you are seeing that student who can easily visualize abstractions, they're highly creative, they notice everything, but then they also have those executive functioning challenges, or maybe they're very impulsive, or they really struggle with organization. They might have dyslexia and struggle with reading, and once they're receiving the supports, they just flourish. These students are one of the most underserved and misunderstood populations in schools. And the U.S. Department of Education has clarified that twice exceptional students are protected under the IDEA. There's two obstacles that negatively impact how schools service twice exceptional students. The first is going to be inadequate or inconsistent identification procedures. This often is resulting from misconceptions regarding eligibility determination. And the second one is a lack of access to appropriate educational experiences. So just as students with special needs require services along a continuum, twice exceptional students require a similar combination of both gifted and special education interventions and modifications. Adults who don't understand twice exceptional children often resort to giving them misinformed messages. And when testing for aptitude and learning disabilities, you often find that the TUI children are smart, although they're struggling. They oftentimes their deficits are not taken seriously. And this often is a result of the lack of knowledge of twice exceptional population and really what their needs are, and the importance of having experts within your school district that are versed in identifying both students with gifted abilities and those with disabilities. So the inadequate or inconsistent identification procedures, this often happens when there's that misconception that a student must be performing below grade level to be eligible for special education services. And this is not accurate. Students can be performing on or above grade level, and if they are struggling in other areas, such as with their behavior or with social skills, that is impacting their ability to connect with their peers on grade level. And this can make them eligible for special education services because it is impeding their progress in the general education classroom, which can also be considered those AP classes or gifted program. Let me see. Additionally, we see that oftentimes schools are using either that discrepancy or MTSS methods to identify students with disabilities. And this can be a challenge when identifying a twice exceptional learner unless you are adjusting for their potentiality. So in order for that severe discrepancy, say with a reading disability, you would be comparing them to other students who are their age and who are also gifted, not to their same age peers in the classroom. So if you see that discrepancy between what's expected and what their performance is, they can still qualify in that area. Next, we have evaluation considerations. Oops. Where did we go? Sorry, it's pausing on me and then I'm clicking it twice. So this is frustrating. Okay. So it's just very important when you're evaluating to consider that asynchronous development by looking at subscores in different tests that you might be conducting and using multiple sources for identification, such as intelligence and achievement tests, use teacher reports, even student interviews or parent and peer referrals or their interviews of what parents are seeing at school. And next, the professional organization of SING and the 2E newsletter and National Association for Gifted Children offers the following guidance: to always use both informal and formal assessments, and to separate out test scores on IQ tests. You might see that the student has a very high processing speed, but then they really struggle with getting that information from their brain and out in their verbal language. So that inconsistent skill in asynchronous development would be a huge red flag that there might be a disability as well as that giftedness. And sometimes we need to reduce qualifying scores to account for those differences or disabilities. One area where that's often seen is if your school's gifted program requires a certain IQ score. And when you look at the full scale IQ, it does not meet that threshold. But when you look at the subcategories, you see that they do qualify in some of the subtests where they might have a very high score, and then a different subtest that has a very low score, which brings down their overall IQ score and doesn't take into account that asynchronicity that's going on. You might need to have oral questioning instead of written testing, and they might need some extra time to demonstrate their knowledge. One of the interesting pieces of advice is SING recommends that anytime a student is suspected of having ADHD, that you also complete assessments to determine if the student is a gifted student. They're finding that the behaviors associated with giftedness often mimic ADHD. So it's very important to be doing that IQ test when you suspect that the student might qualify under that OHI or ADHD. Next, to touch base again on that caution when using MTSS or RTI methods, because these methods are, they're created to identify those students who are not performing at grade level and to do that quickly and then provide that intervention. But we see with gifted students that they are often performing at or above grade level. And so using MTSS as your main method of identification would not flag those students unless you are considering that potentiality again. So that early intervention to keep up with grade expectations, that might not be the most reliable way to identify a student who is a gifted learner. When we are supporting a twice exceptional student, we want to take this dual lens and a strengths-based approach and focus on areas of giftedness and allow them that opportunity to excel in areas where it's a natural strength or they have a high interest. And make sure that any remediation is also that student is also being provided enrichment at the same time. It is also recommended that counseling is provided to all 2E and gifted learners, just because they are at such high risk for mental illness, depression, anxiety, and just keeping on top of them so that they really understand that they might think a little bit differently than others and just understand themselves more, which can help resolve some of these issues that we see as the student gets older. We want to make sure that we're accommodating academic strengths and gifts. whenever possible, we want to see this interdisciplinary curriculum. So you're maybe teaching multiple subjects at one time, to scaffold instruction and differentiate instruction so that you are being able to provide that enrichment in the general education classroom and keep this child engaged and stimulated. Allow them to challenge material, to ask questions, they want to know why. And student-led learning that's led by student inquiry and questioning of content can be really beneficial for these learners. Even giving them maybe a project where they are going to research one of their burning questions that they have, and then allow them to share that with the class. Providing alternate ways to demonstrate their understanding, especially if they struggle with organization in their writing. And then whenever possible, to allow all students in the classroom that the ability to participate in any enrichment activities. There we go. Again, we want that emphasis to be on their strengths first, so that strength-based approach to learning. Mediation strategies. Oh, wow. Hold on. Let me. There we go. So to modify assignments when needed, one of the big frustrations for students who are twice exceptional is to have to be doing meaningless busy work over and over, which is what they sometimes see when they're given extra work rather than more enriching work. Or if they've demonstrated mastery in math and then to have them complete 15 of the same problems might lead to some power struggles there because they are frustrated. If they already know it, let's let them move on to something else. And to think about the environment, sensory needs, positive environment, seat locations. Sometimes it's even matching teachers with a student so that their personalities mesh a little bit better than sometimes we'll see a power struggle going on in the classroom. And it's okay to acknowledge that this match is not working for either the teacher or the student and to consider a different placement in a different classroom. Next, we have this eligibility and support, which we had talked about a little bit on how special education, that need can be established for a gifted student, and to consider the unique circumstances of the student and comparing it to the potentiality. Okay, so IEP and related services. This is one that we hear a lot. And IEP is that individualized education program. It does not mean remedial. It can also be for a student who is performing at or above grade level. And for twice exceptional students, and whenever you can for all students, when the IEP can focus on areas of strengths and gifts as well as their areas of weakness, it really benefits the student. You can also create IEP goals to address the specific needs of the advanced learner. Some states will do what they call an enrichment IEP or an advanced IEP and a special education IEP. Here in Montana, we typically recommend that you combine it all in one. But if your district prefers to do two plans, then that is another option that you could use. And there are some examples of those advanced learning plans on the OPI website for gifted and talented education. whenever possible, you want to accommodate those academic weaknesses by providing hands-on learning, graphic organizers, differentiating instruction, and then providing the direct instruction in those targeted skills that the student is lacking. Allow for modifications, such as using a spell check when they might need to, or provide direct instruction in study skills and learning strategies. It does not come naturally for all of these students, and you really need to break it down and show them what the expectation is and how to do it. It's so important to just be flexible and differentiate. And another important aspect of working with students who are gifted or twice exceptional is to really help them develop the skills and knowledge necessary to increase their own self-awareness and self-understanding, such as self-advocacy and setting appropriate goals. So 2E learners in Montana. Montana is a local controlled state, which I'm sure you've heard throughout your time working in Montana. And Montana allows districts to make gifted eligibility determinations locally, but all districts are required to provide gifted and talented services to students. And those programs are required to be differentiated educational programs beyond those normally offered in public schools to allow that student to achieve their potential to their self and society. And Montana's standards of accreditation do require that each school district provides educational services to high ability, high potential students commensurate with their needs as outlined in the comprehensive district framework for gifted education. And that is one of our administrative rules here in Montana. Some state guidance on identifying twice exceptional students can be found in the special education handbook that we have, or the guidance that we have listed on the OPI special education site. And if you're looking through that, number 26, so may a student be identified for both gifted and talented and special education related services? And yes, they absolutely can, and that is twice exceptional. And then that gifted student who has average academic achievement can still be determined eligible for special education and related services. So how does the IEP address the needs of a twice exceptional student if the district does not have a dedicated gifted and talented program? So if your school does not do the advanced learning IEPs or another way to measure progress with students who are identified as gifted and talented, then the IEP must address the educational needs that have been identified. And this can include areas of enrichment for the student, as well as any kind of content extension, acceleration, or social emotional support. Final thoughts, just before you leave, the big ideas is just to make sure that any assessment or evaluation you are doing is comprehensive enough to get a holistic view of the child. And educators should let parents know that if they have performance concerns in a bright child, that they do still have that right for a comprehensive assessment. And the school does need to go through the required process of a parent referral for special education evaluation. Early reading intervention can help prevent a lot of the potential loss of motivation if the student is struggling with reading and yet that's being masked maybe by their oral skills and vocabulary. And to remember, if you're using an RTI program, that you might need to modify that peer base to consider students who are performing above grade level. And lastly, that really the strengths-based approach is the best area to start to support students who are gifted or twice exceptional. Okay, So that is my presentation that goes over the basics of choice exceptionality. I will stop sharing. I'll see if I can turn my video back on. But what burning questions do you have, or any concerns that maybe arose during the presentation that I can help with? Oh, Jenny, I'm looking through the chat and I see that your previous school district did not identify until 3rd grade. And that is pretty common, actually. A lot of times districts will wait until 3rd grade to do gifted, talented identification to ensure that the student has had the access to a general education, and that their acceleration maybe isn't because their parents were teaching it at school or a student who might be very far behind, but once they have access in that general education classroom, they just start to fly through the curriculum. So it allows that time for teachers to instruct the students and then determine where that student might be and whether identification or evaluation is appropriate.
Yeah, then that's really common too, because a lot of times those IQ scores, they say, aren't particularly accurate until you get to 3rd grade. My concern has always been with that a lot of schools will just do a blanket identification of gifted kiddos, do a screener for everybody at 3rd grade, and then that's it. So,
yes,
and then they never come back around to that. So that's why I put in there, if you miss the gifted bus, then you missed it. That's it. Too bad, and I think that's unfortunate, especially with 2E kids, that they miss out on that because they don't circle back around. So that's just something to keep in mind. It shouldn't ever be too late to be assessed for giftedness, just like it's not ever too late to be assessed for special education services. They go hand in hand, but I think we sometimes treat them differently, and that is too bad.
Absolutely. And it is, if there's a suspicion of giftedness, same as if there's a suspicion of a disability, that the school is obligated to proceed with an evaluation or issue a prior written notice to the parent or teacher bringing up the concern, explaining why they feel the evaluation is not necessary. So parents, teachers, anyone can make that referral at any time, but you're right that we often will see that blanket screener go out and then it never comes back. So yeah. It's disappointing that happens so frequently.
I also thought, and I guess I have an advantage over everybody else because I got to look at the slides a little bit ahead of time, but I thought it was really interesting in your slides how it said that a lot of times their issues don't show up in elementary school with 2E kids. A lot of times their issues show up later in middle school and high school. And I thought that was interesting. I had never seen that before. And I think that has some interesting and important implications for people. We're used to identifying young, and then that IEP or the gifted label follows them all the way through school. But what if things aren't showing up until middle school or high school? What if their giftedness is enough to mask, like your slides were saying? What if their giftedness was enough to mask their disability, and then all of a sudden in middle school or high school, they can't keep up anymore? And teachers are going, what is happening? So yeah, that needs to be, an eye needs to be kept on that, I guess I would say.
Absolutely. And we see that frequently also with students who are on the autism spectrum, but they might be what used to be called that high functioning or level 1. So they are able to make it through until everything just gets piled on them at once. And they might not even understand the pressure that they're feeling, just trying to keep up with the social connections that become so important in middle and high school And then those academics where they were able to get by without studying or without learning how to organize information. But then that growth, that personal growth kind of flattens out. So the student might start out in first grade where they're reading at a fifth grade reading level, and maybe they're doing sixth grade math, but then we're not seeing them gain any new skills. So when they're in sixth grade, we would expect them to be performing at a higher level. But if they're still performing at a sixth grade level and hit that plateau, that's a big red flag that there might be some kind of disability that's preventing their progress, or that their educational placement is not providing them the new information and stimulation that they need to continue along their potentiality growth. So, absolutely.
So I have a question for the whole group, for everybody here. I, as a special ed teacher previously, I've actually taught 2E kids before, but what I saw was the ones in particular that I had IEPs for behavior. Intellectually, academically, they were gifted, but their IEPs were for behavior issues, ED types of things. Has anybody else ever taught a 2E kid before, or maybe even suspected that you might be teaching a 2E kid?
I suppose I did when I was a special ed teacher, but I also had like the ED and autism group, so I kind of frequently ran across that for that reason. So I already had the one half automatically.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, and it's so easy to look at, to get stuck in that. Well, we're seeing the behavior, we're seeing the lagging social skills maybe, and we're addressing those needs, but the student is not getting any of that academic needs, or they're not feeling like they are part of the group. So they're always feeling an outsider, and then they're just funneled into this behavioral problem group that they can never get out of, especially when the behavior is a result of not having those skills, not having the social skills or the executive functioning, or they're bored in the classroom. And when you're sitting there being taught things that you already know, the classroom can become a really frustrating place for the teacher and the student.
Well, you guys, we have about 1 minute left. Is there any last comments or anything? I did add Alicia's email to that SPED Community of Practice link, the Google link. I just sent everybody an email with their PDU certificate. So if you have any
perfect.
follow-up questions for Alicia, please don't hesitate to reach out to her.
Yes, and if your district has any of these students and they're challenging, or you're not sure what to do with them because they're causing so many distractions in the classroom, but you suspect that they're gifted, we also can provide some consultation services too. So don't hesitate to give me a call, and myself or sometimes Katie with the Autism Project are happy to assist and see how we can help you create programming for that student. Yes. I apologize profusely for this technological hiccups today, but thank you for those of you that stuck it out. I appreciate it very much. And just don't hesitate to contact me with any questions.
And thank you, Alicia. Your information was fantastic as always. So